Designing and implementing a server infrastructure. Hi, I'm Don Jones, and I'm going to be guiding you through this series of nuggets that are designed to help you prepare for Microsoft's 7413 exam, designing and implementing a server infrastructure. We are going to be covering a lot of design level topics. The assumption with this exam, which is one of the new MCSE exams, is that you've already passed the MCSA exams, the administrator exams, that teach you how to implement a design that someone else has given you. Now it's time to move up to creating that design yourself. So you're starting in this nugget, which is an introduction. And here I'm really just going to go through the outline of what's coming up so that you can kind of orient yourself. The next nugget is one you shouldn't skip. It doesn't relate directly to the exam, but it will let me show you how to set up a lab environment where you can practice the things that you're going to need to practice as I show them to you. There's also a few little prerequisite configuration steps that we'll get out of the way there, so you will definitely pick up some useful information. Things start in earnest with nugget number 3, designing an automated server installation strategy. Now, this is going to include things like when to use images versus bare metal or virtual deployment, how to design a server implementation using the Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit, the ADK, and how to design a virtual server deployment. After that's a pretty big topic, planning and implementing a server deployment infrastructure. So this is where we're going to talk about things like configuring multicast deployment, where configuring multi-site topology and distribution points, configuring a multi-server topology as well, configuring autonomous and replica Windows deployment services, WDS servers, and we're also going to get into planning and implementing server upgrade and migration, because obviously you're not going to deploy brand new servers every time, you're going to have some upgrades to do too. So we'll plan for things like role migration. Server roles migrate servers across domains and forests, designing a server consolidation strategy, and planning for capacity and resource optimization. Now after that, this might come as a surprise to you if you thought that the exam and all these topics were going to be focused exclusively on Windows Server 2012, but we are going to be planning and deploying a virtual machine manager services installation. You see, the new MCSE exams really focus on the whole job task, not just a single operating system. So this is where we're going to talk about System Center, Virtual Machine Manager, service templates, operating system profiles, hardware and capability profiles, managing services, configuring images and template libraries, managing logical networks, all that kind of stuff that really provides a basis for using Windows Server 2012 in a virtualization environment. After that, we'll start diving into some of the more traditional topics, I guess, planning and implementing file storage services for one. This is where we'll talk about some of your different SAN or storage area network choices, things like iSCSI and Fiber Channel. We'll also talk about virtual Fiber Channel, very important. And we'll get into some of the new Windows Server 2012 features, storage spaces, storage pools, data deduplication, stuff like that. We'll look at the iSCSI target service, the Internet Storage Name Server, or ISNS, how to configure network file system to support Unix clients, and a brief look at device-specific modules, or DSMs. In nugget number 7, we're going to move on to your network infrastructure stuff, designing and maintaining a DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol solution. We'll talk about the options for building a highly available DHCP solution, including techniques like split scope, DHCP failover, and DHCP failover clustering. We'll also talk about DHCP v6, DHCP filtering, implementing some of the maintenance tasks, basic backup and recovery type stuff for your DHCP database. Nugget number 8 will see us moving on to name resolution strategy design. Now, this is where we're going to talk about things like secure name resolution, stuff like DNSSEC, DNS socket pool, cache locking, and things like that. We'll also talk about some of the operational issues around name resolution, like disjoint namespaces, migrating to application partitions for your DNS servers, IPv6 and its impact on DNS, single label DNS name resolution as kind of a migration strategy from WINS, zone hierarchy, and zone delegation. Continuing with the infrastructure services, and number 9, we'll get into designing and managing an IP address management solution, a new feature in Windows Server 2012. So we'll talk about the new IP address management, or IPAM role, group policy-based and manual provisioning of that, distributed versus centralized placement of that, role-based access control, auditing, all that kind of stuff. Number 10 will actually take us into a slightly different topic, network access services, getting users in from remote locations. And we'll start with designing a VPN solution. Talk about certificate deployment, firewall configuration, client to site and site to site, bandwidth concerns, protocol implications, some of the VPN deployment configuration options using the Connection Manager Administration Kit, or CMAC. Now, hopefully your head's not too full at that point because we're only halfway done by then. In number 11, we're going to talk about designing a direct access solution. Now, direct access has changed a lot for Windows Server 2012, so it's going to be really important to pay attention to what you can and cannot do. We'll talk about design considerations mostly, topology, migrating from the Forefront Unified Access Gateway version of direct access deployment, and enterprise certificates. Now, number 12, we're going to take everything that you learned about design in 10 and 11 for VPNs and direct access and actually implement a scalable remote access solution. This is kind of one of the few times in this exam where you're going to need to know how to implement your design, not just what design to make. So in here, we'll talk about configuring site-to-site VPNs, configuring packet filters, implementing packet tracing, implementing multi-site remote access, which includes direct access, and how to configure network load balancing, which you're going to use along with things like direct access. Still talking about that remote access topic, we'll move on to designing and implementing a network protection solution. So this will be things like network access protection, enforcement methods for DHCP, IPsec, VPN, 802.1x, capacity of network access protection, where you place your servers, how your firewall gets into it, how to set up remediation networks, multi-radius deployment, configuring it for different types of enforcement modes, all kinds of stuff. Number 14 finally moves us on to a different topic, Active Directory infrastructure. And this is where you'll design and implement your forest and domain infrastructure. And some of the design considerations are going to include things like multi-forest architecture, trusts, functional level, domain upgrades and migrations, and forest restructuring. From an implementation perspective, we'll talk about configuring domain rename, configuring Kerberos Realm trusts, actually implementing a domain upgrade or migration, implementing a forest restructure as well, and deploying and managing a test forest that can synchronize with your production forest. For number 15, we're going to move into designing your group policy strategy. How are you going to use group policy? Because there's no question that you are going to use it. We'll talk about some of the different group policy features that you can decide to use or not use for different situations, like inheritance blocking, enforced policies, loopback processing, security, and WMI filtering. We'll talk about site-linked group policy objects, slow link processing, GPO group strategies and organizational unit hierarchy, and advanced group policy management, or AGPM. Along the same lines, and if you'll notice here, there's definitely a theme going on, right? So along the same lines in number 16, we're going to talk about some strategies for managing permissions in Active Directory, including stuff like object security and Active Directory quotas, customizing the tasks that you delegate and the delegation of control wizard, deploying administrative tools on client computers for folks that you delegate permissions to, delegating permissions on administrative users, and configuring Kerberos delegation. Finally, our last major topic is going to focus on Active Directory's physical infrastructure, including number 17, designing an AD sites topology. Stuff like proximity of domain controllers, replication optimization, site links, stuff like that. 18 gets us on to designing a domain controller strategy, including global catalog placement, FSMO roles, read-only domain controllers, partial attribute sets, and even a new feature, domain controller cloning, which is actually really cool, especially if you're virtualizing your domain controllers. We're on the home stretch in number 19 with designing and implementing a branch office infrastructure. Things to support those branch offices that might not have IT folks or might not have awesome bandwidth back to the office. Read-only domain controllers come in again here, along with universal group membership caching, global catalog placement, DNS, DHCP, and branch cache features, confidential attributes, delegating administration over servers in the branch office, modifying the filtered attribute sets, configuring password replication policy, and configuring hash publication. I'm going to wrap you up with a nugget on additional exam tips and tricks. And I'll not only provide some tips for actually taking the exam and what to expect when you get to the exam center, but some additional technical tips, things to kind of challenge your brain and really get you in the mood for thinking about these technical topics from an exam perspective. So that's what we've got in front of us. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.